Hello, I'm Deborah Elizabeth Finn, one of the co-conveners of the Ethos Roundtable. The Ethos Roundtable is an informal group that meets in the Boston area once a month for discussions and presentations. We are interested in using information and communication technologies for positive social change and in measuring and expanding ethos. The word ethos has a long and honorable history. In ancient Greek democracy, it was used as a term of art and oratory and referred to the moral authority to speak. In the 20th century, the symbolic anthropologist Clifford Geertz used it to describe elements of culture that made for cohesion but did not fit into the category of worldview. In the 21st century, it is often used to describe the guiding beliefs or spirit of a group of people. Ethos Roundtable co-convener Josh Shortledge proposed it as the name of our group, and it has served us well since we are interested in discussing ways that we can use technology to support more nurturing, cohesive, and meaningful communities. Please join us now as the Ethos Roundtable convenes at Brookline Access Television. Josh Shortledge is our facilitator, and our featured guests are Chuck Sherwood, Jeff Hansel, and Peter Zawadzki.
So welcome to the Ethos Roundtable, the first ever televised Ethos Roundtable, using technology for positive social change. Thank you to the Brookline Access TV. This is great, really appreciate it. And thank you also for Mass Access for webcasting. This will be a live webcast. And Peter Miller, thank you very much for being a director and putting this all together. This is quite a production happening here. And thank you to Deborah Finn, who's not here. She's actually in Texas right now, so she's here in spirit, though. Today's session, Innovations in Community Cable, Community Access Cable. We have three experts here. I'll introduce them in a little bit. How PEG developed over the past 30 years and what the future's possibilities are. Some definitions. So PEG, Public Educational and Government Access to Television. And CMC is Community Media Center. A key access of public access TV is the public-private partnership. So it's the U.S. Congress decided that the for-profit cable operators had to give access to the cables that they were stringing on the poles. And they put together these community access television studios that we're in now. And we're going to be discussing how those can be used. Today, public educational and governmental access to TV stations across America and around the world produce more hours of original non-repeated programming than ABC, CBS, and NBC and Fox Network combined. Chuck Sherwood, to my right here, is Principal Community Media Visioning and Senior Associate Teledimensions Incorporated. Jeff Hansel, on the far side, Executive Director of Belmont Media Center. And Peter Zawadzki is a home brother, Executive Director of Brookline Access Television. So let me just start it off with innovations in community and cable access. Chuck, you're on.
Absolutely. One of the things that I often do is to remind folks that as our friends from across the river, Santayana, if we don't know our history, then we repeat it. And I have always found that most people because all information and communications technology, whether it goes back to the 19th century with cable, with the telegraph, onto electricity and telephone, and it's all invisible. And so people just expect it to be there, but don't understand that there is first policy that it rides on. There's infrastructure it rides on, and then there's the technology or the devices that use that infrastructure. So that we are, at this point in the 21st century, the latest buzzword is broadband, which I've always found was a very interesting word. When I fell into Manhattan Cable in 1975 to become an intern there to start up a government access operation, one of the earliest in the country, with a background of government and regional planning, what I discovered was that the folks there and at the Alternate Media Center at NYU, who were basically consultants to Manhattan Cable in setting this up, everybody was talking about a book, The Wired Nation, which had been published in 1974, that actually got expanded, even though it's not a very long book. Originally, Ralph Lee Smith had written an entire issue of Nation magazine in 1968 saying, what are the potentials once we really start building out a wireline communications infrastructure? That became known basically as cable TV. One of the things that, even though I didn't read the book at the time, and only a year and a half ago when I was the guest editor for an issue of Community Media Review that I had come up with the topic, which was connecting community media centers to the new broadband networks, that I said, you know, I really can't write this book, even though I'd selected all of the writers, had been living the broadband dream with everybody over the last 30, 40 years, but I'd never read Ralph's book. Needless to say, it was totally simple to go onto Amazon and find a copy of the book for a few dollars, which had a wonderful jazzy cover to it, which I thought, oh, this is kind of fun in the 1970s, that they would make it look like a computer screen, TV screen. But that was just the beginning, because by the time I got to the second paragraph of the opening chapter, What is Cable TV?, it totally transformed my entire understanding of what I had been doing and what we as a PEG Access community media community had been doing for the last 35, 40 years. And just quickly, I'll read the first sentence of the second paragraph. Cable television was originally called Community Antenna Television. If people remember, that's CATV, and is still widely known as CATV. It began as a minor adjunct to the present system of over-the-air commercial broadcasting. Now often called broadband communications, it is on the verge of becoming a major medium in its own right. As cable television systems are installed in major cities and metropolitan areas, the stage is being set for a communications revolution. A revolution that some experts called the wired nation. Today, it's not the wired nation, it's the connected planet. And so where has all of this been happening? Because guess what? It has not just been the United States. It turns out once you get into reading the book, and I was well aware of all of this because I was seeing these documents coming out of the RAND and out of various foundations. Everybody in the 60s, and particularly the late 60s, were doing these reports saying, there's a potential for using this technology to do X, Y, and Z. Now, of course, we also have to put this within a social and political and cultural context. The other things that were going on were the anti-war movement, the war on poverty, the feminist movement, the civil rights movement, ultimately, gay rights movement. All of this was going on in the United States particularly, but also in Canada. It turns out that as I found more and more about the Alternate Media Center at NYU, it turns out one of the two people who had created it, George Stoney, Red Burns is the other person. Red is basically, was a Canadian. She was part of a very innovative community in New York City. George Stoney, who was a journalist and filmmaker, had ultimately been brought to Canada by the Canadian Film Board because a lot of people in the academic community, the foundation community, were doing, how do we open up our channels of communications? The networks, there are 3. Oh, PBS, 4. The newspapers are controlled. Radio stations are controlled. Everything is controlled. The idea was we need to break open the scarcity of communications resources that's available to people, movements, and organizations. And that's where channels on cable television occurred. Now, in Canada, the Channels for Change project was not about cable television. What it was about was providing a feedback loop for the federal and provincial governments regarding how people who were going to be receiving the benefits from, say, their welfare reform activities in Canada. They wanted to know how people felt about all of this. What were their issues? They needed a way to hear from them because in their own neighborhoods, in their own community settings. And so what ends up happening is that Challenge for Change, Canadian Film Board, right? They started off with Super 8 cameras. That's what they were using. Lo and behold, in 1968, Sony introduced the open reel Portapak, which was the first portable technology. Our computers, our smartphones, our iPads, everything is now all of those things, but back then it was the Sony open reel Portapak. They then switched to that. It was a much more immediate way of people being able to communicate and hear themselves. And so that's what Challenge for Change ended up doing. They then had community meetings where they would screen what people were shooting. They were taught how to use the equipment. They said, okay, this is your issue, let's go for it. They went ahead and shot these videos. Those videos were then shipped off to the provincial and federal governments, and it was a feedback loop. George then moves to NYU to start teaching in the film department. He and Red connect, and they create the Alternate Media Center. with the idea, because also happening in 1968 was the first major urban cable franchise in the country. Now keep in mind, and I'll run through this very quickly, don't fall asleep. The reason PEG access happened is because the cable companies are using the public rights-of-way of the municipality. And the municipality has a fiduciary responsibility to go ahead and collect rents from the cable operator in order to run their system. That ended up being the original ideas. The FCC finally went ahead and instituted some rules and regulations because suddenly everybody wanted to have cable television systems. Because keep in mind, just as Ralph writes in his book, cable television systems begin in the valley towns out in coal country, Pennsylvania, where they put an antenna on a telephone pole at the top of one of the hills and ran wires down to the appliance store who was selling TVs, but in the valley you couldn't get reception from Philadelphia or from Pittsburgh. That then spread into people's homes, into the bars, so that the coal miners, there's a wonderful documentary that was done back in the 70s called Our Channels, where you had people in those valley towns who owned the bars telling about how the miners would come in there and watch Howdy Doody and the Lone Ranger with all of us kids, because I'm of that age, in the 50s, who were watching all of this. Cable television, the reason New York got started is because New York had the same problems with reception of over-the-air broadcast as a valley town in Pennsylvania. They didn't realize at the time that when they started building all of the high-rises in Midtown and downtown, that the antenna on top of the Empire State Building, which is where all the broadcasting signals were coming out, would then have interference because of all of the high-rise buildings. They had to come up with a solution, and the solution was cable television. Those systems, there was a blue ribbon committee that was chaired by Fred Friendly, and based upon Ralph's Nation magazine article, based upon these different reports, they basically said, okay, what has to happen here in order to create the vision that these studies have all projected that could be possible with cable television system, where scarcity was no longer an issue. If you have a 12 or 18 channel cable system and there's the 3 networks on PBS and maybe a couple of UHF stations, what's the issue? What are we going to do with these other channels? And the cable television operators out in the valley towns all around and distant communities all around the country had already known what they wanted to do with those channels. They wanted to show meetings. They wanted to show local sports. They wanted to do their own news shows because the broadcasters and the newspapers that were in the major metropolitan areas usually weren't covering their communities. They knew that this was an asset. All of that stuff converged, and ultimately all of it has spread around the country to the point where we now have over 2,000 public educational and government access management entities. If folks would be interested, a real easy way to take a look at this, there's a brand new mapped database called communitymediadatabase.org, and you can take a look at it. So that's a lot of the history in all of this. What has, of course, occurred, and this is really the stuff that Peter and Jeff are going to be really focusing on, is that, of course, everything has changed. We moved from half-inch open reel porta-packs into VHS. We made the migration from analog technology to digital technology. The internet became a resource that everybody wanted to use. Keep in mind that, as I often remind people, there's nothing that we're doing on the internet now that hasn't been experimented with at some point in time in a cable television system. The only difference is that since these franchises were normally issued by a single municipality or maybe a couple of municipalities, there was no interconnection between these systems, which is, in fact, what was supposed to happen but didn't. Now, of course, that did ultimately happen once you had cable television empires buying out each other and connecting it all together. And once you had satellites going up there and satellite programming coming down to the cable television systems and filling up the channels. And so here we are in 2012, and we have lots of innovation that has been going on within this community. And keep in mind that the transformation from a PEG access center to a community media center only spreads an umbrella. It's no longer just about community television. It's also about community computing. It's also about community art galleries. And as you've probably noticed when you walk in here, there's art from the community hanging on all the walls. Some access centers are also owning their own theaters, doing community radio, whether it's full power FM or low power FM. All of those are the umbrellas. Media literacy education, all of those fit within that community media umbrella. And there's lots and lots of civic journalism going on in these access centers. So it's about content creation, it's about the technology in order to create that content and capture it, and then it's about what devices are you going to use running over what infrastructure, whether it's wireline or wireless, in order so people can receive it. Enough of me.
So I guess I would add, so what about young people?
Oh, youth video, youth content is, every access center in the world is awash in it. And in fact, the Alliance for Community Media is just about ready to launch a major youth media initiative around the country. Philadelphia, which after 25 years of fighting City Hall, has finally launched its first access center. Keep in mind that everybody's pretty comfortable with government access, which is a lot of meetings, or educational access, which is a lot of school sports. But having public access in a community can oftentimes be provocative, controversial, entertaining. It's everything you ever or never wanted to know about the people who live in your community. And that can be very threatening in a lot of places. So that public access oftentimes has a hard time of it. But you know, the youth media, and I'm sure these guys will talk about the efforts. Keep in mind that an awful lot of access centers, particularly in the early days when they were managed by the cable company rather than nonprofits, an awful lot of those access centers, particularly here in Massachusetts, were located in either middle schools or high schools. That everybody always understood that the kids are the future of all of this. And you know, we can go around the room and John, who's been involved both with Falmouth Community TV and Cambridge Community TV, can talk, as these guys can, about, and And of course, Wendy can talk about the stuff that's been going on in access centers, that the youth is the future. We're getting older. You know, after 25 years, I said, enough.
Well,
So I've been consulting for 10 years.
And somebody's got to pick up the new technology. And
Exactly, and these kids know how to use that technology from the very beginning. The issue is, do they know how to create the content? Do they understand, you know, that, you know, the media literacy, the four issue, you know, media literacy, that all content is constructed, that all content has a point of view. You know, whether they understand that is another issue. So that's, happy to answer anybody's questions, whether it's online, because we are being Twittered, assumedly, as well as folks here.
great.
Well, we can just
That's
go on
great,
with the guys.
Yeah, I mean, is there any feedback from the room, or? And you don't have to wait for a break either. If you have an idea, you can like stop anybody.
Well, I mean, we were invited to interrupt, but we're too well bred and well behaved to do that. I actually started in television in 1953 with a guy named Sonny Fox, who ended up being president of the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. I was also a local access coordinator in 1981, which is not long after that book was published. I have one small chicken and the egg comment, and that is the why did people start to produce content for cable television? And my opinion is that it was impossible to sell cable television to anybody who had good reception.
Oh, absolutely.
If all you were selling was what they got for free over the air.
Correct.
The other part of that is that very few of the CATV operations originally were public. They were, you know, co-ops of people who didn't get reception and decided there was a way out of it, which meant that there was no public interference when they decided to put a camera in the local radio station and run the local news and things.
Right.
And so they were very free to experiment because they weren't private businesses so much as that they were community cooperatives, as they were talked about.
That's true, yep.
And then the other organization that I believe belongs in your history, and maybe it's only because of my history and the history, is the NFLCP.
Well, you are aware that the NFLCP is now called the Alliance for Community Media. So the NFLCP, everybody from Access knows the, as I
What does
referred to it,
what
the
does it stand
National
for?
Football League of the Communist Party. Because there were an awful lot of folks in the early days of the NFLCP who were, shall we say, liberal, radical. You know, it's where you could go do things that you couldn't do other places.
But that's what got, that, in my opinion, was a central part of cross-pollination between systems and
Right.
and loaning programming and spreading programming and giving, heaven forsake, awards for quality community programming and things.
Absolutely,
and
and
that's why I think it
Yep.
belongs in there.
Yeah, well, guess what? I wasn't going to go into a whole
What is
history.
this, what's the real NFLCP stand for?
National Federation of Local Cable Programmers.
Okay.
And keep in mind that because I didn't go into a lot of the history of the Alternate Media Center, keep in mind that the Alternate Media Center, Red and George, ultimately got a big grant from the NEA and created an internship program in collaboration with cable operators. And so half of the salary was paid for by the NEA grant, and there were 19 of these interns over the period that the program ran at the Alternate Media Center. And the other half of the salary was paid by the cable operator, because they understood, because of the history back in the 40s and the 50s, that local content was important. Because keep in mind, you're right, I mean, nobody wanted to do cable TV or subscribe to cable TV if all you were getting was the same stuff that you had. That's why the imported signal stuff started happening. That's why suddenly, Ted Turner's whole empire was basically based upon microwaving his TV signal all around the country, and Chicago also. It was really the coming of programming, satellite delivered programming, that made the difference. That was the reason, and home box office, of course, which just so happened Manhattan Cable created home box office. MTV was originally created by some of the interns that I knew doing other things other than government access, which is what I was doing. They were getting the video clips from the record companies and putting them on to assembling them all into the edit, and that's where MTV. That's the whole point of having these community communications resources, or as Dirk Koning loved to say, the training, the tools, and the transmission, the 3 T's. That's what made it exciting. There were very few limits. I'm not going to say no limits, because as we all know that there are limits. It has to be constitutionally protected speech. Of course, there's safe harbor time where programming with adult content ends up on access channels. But just keep in mind that's the whole point of all of this. This is where we can experiment. This is where we can have innovation. And that's why I say the kind of stuff that we see happening now on the internet, a lot of that innovation really started out with what was going on. I mean, the whole pay-per-view programming stuff that was going on in the 80s that the cable operators themselves were creating. Some of a guy by the name of Steve Cosgrove out in Chicago created a community bulletin board where you could call in on a telephone number and you could request a particular screen of information. I mean, there was all that interactive stuff, all of that stuff, a lot of that innovation was really going on. And of course, the whole, blogging or vlogging or whatever you want to call it, it's just public access,
Of course, we were very low budget in those days.
And we
now
still are.
And now the internet is even lower budget.
Yes, yes. Well, that's because of all of the wonderful technology. In fact, it was really hilarious on the Alliance listserv today. Someone came on and said, I'm thinking about buying a couple of iPads that we can then go ahead and have checked out so people can use this. Somebody responded, oh yeah, and there's some sort of software that can now connect those 3 iPads, and you can have like a 3-camera shoot and control it from the iPads. I mean, the innovation potentials of all of this, whether it be this or the technology that we're using here right now, it's really unlimited. It's only limited by our imagination.
So let's bring in, who wants to jump in next?
I don't know if I can jump. I don't know if I can follow all that.
Well,
Well, let me tell. I think I can follow.
oh yeah, yeah.
Let me
you can,
just tell you though.
because the tie-in,
Yeah.
the bicycling that you were talking about,
Yeah.
programming. That's exactly what Jeff
Yeah.
is going to talk about.
I used to
We've called it's now it became a digital bicycle, and now it's called
I used to syndicate a program
yeah.
produced in Somerville. And in order to syndicate it, I had to mail tapes across the country.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Lots of access centers have done that.
And
the
lots still do.
Yeah, they still do. But the solution now is
Well, I was just going to say, I started in Access. My name's Jeff Hansel. Thanks for letting me be here. I started in Access in, 1927, really. So, I mean, no, just kidding. We had gas-powered televisions. I'm not going to talk about history, but you were talking about how the innovations in the community media. And in the 80s in Colorado, we started with the NFL CP bicycle, which doesn't mean anything to anybody except that you would take shows from Boulder to Longmont to Fort Collins to Denver and mail them around, and that's how you got cross-pollination. That's how you saw shows in different cities. And of course, at that time, it was interesting for people to see what else was going on in other communities, because there was a lot of just pure creativity, a lot of free speech, not so much like the reality TV, not that kind of stuff, but programs people actually would want to see maybe and would have some interest in seeing, rather than being fed it, But today, what we have in Massachusetts really was a constant evolution and innovation that was really started at UMass Boston by people like Peter Miller, who's in the audience, called the Commonwealth Broadband Network and the Digital Bicycle. And it sort of kept evolving into what we have, what we call the MyMass TV Network, or the MyMass TV statewide network. And maybe I can show people a little bit of that, what that really means. But I'll, is the PowerPoint on there somewhere too? Yeah, thank you. So we're gonna, what it's built on, in my view anyway, and I've been involved in it for the last since I came to Massachusetts since 2000. And we've been working through, we tried one iteration, gave that up, tried something else, but it really was built on what I would call community organizing, and community organizing through community media. And having studied this a little bit, the only thing I want to say in parallel is that people talk today, and it's appropriate to talk a little bit about the fact that you have this season, the premiere of Mad Men, history of advertising in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
And people talking about President Obama being a community organizer. But if you really study this, you'll see that what advertising has been doing for the past 70 years, they extracted directly from the principles of community organizing. And there's nobody using that any better than Madison Avenue. So when you think about it, realize that community organizing is everywhere in every industry, and it's really being used in a way that people are completely unaware of in advertising and social media marketing and public relations particularly. But you can still use it in a nonprofit way to connect people, to connect for communication. And what we did in, I'll just skip along that. What we just want to talk about a little bit in terms of defining what MyMass TV is. And marriage partners have strong ties. That should be pretty obvious to everyone. Large areas of common vital interest. Business partnerships have strong or weak ties depending upon their vital interest. And local nonprofits, government agencies, and institutions have strong, weak, or no ties at all to each other. But what we discovered with community media centers is they have ties to every institution, to every person, to every school in the community. And that's something that has not often been utilized by community media centers, to see that you have something that everybody wants, that has everybody has an interest in. And so what we came up with MyMass TV is that we saw that local governments and state governments were desperate to find a way to connect to residents, to get information out to the vast majority of residents. And they were mailing DVDs, they were primarily, and just trying to find a way to get their information out to residents. And so we partnered with basically Telview, which is now called, Telview, which used to be called Princeton Server Group, and a lot of the other server companies, video server companies, and Mass Access, which is the statewide nonprofit that worked with all the community media centers in Massachusetts, which is around 100 to 140, depending upon how you do the membership numbers. And we saw that there was a weak tie there between all of those, that we could somehow connect the media centers with technology back to the state. And so we developed at that time what was called Mass Access SoftNet, which was a way for the state government and nonprofits to get their information, get their content to all the media centers electronically. So it became the true digital bicycle. And we connected the state of Massachusetts, the governor's office, and other agencies. And using mass access by purchasing a video server, we're now basically we created a statewide network informally. It doesn't cost the taxpayers any money, doesn't cost the state government any money, and certainly doesn't cost the cable companies any money. But what we're finding since bringing this online is that the vast majority of programming that's being used that's being downloaded in about now 110 different communities is our programs being produced by the governor's office, the Office of Consumer Affairs, the Attorney General, the Department of Elder Affairs, because there's what has happened with community television over time is that most of local governments now see their community TV station as being vital to actually carrying out the functions of government. They see that they absolutely need that channel to be able to get information out to people. And while they're using
what the community server is this literally a server that sits here and is networked around the state so other...
It's like an old-fashioned network with new-fashioned technology. So we will upload a program that's timely about a particular nonprofit or particular speech that the governor gave or regulation, and then we alert all the stations on the network that content is there, although many of them frequently will log in and see what's up there, and then they will all download that program and play it back in their community.
So you own the server and it's open to anybody on the network?
Right. But, and while there's more and more public access programming being put up there, what we're trying to teach people, and I guess train people how to use that server so it actually becomes efficient and remains useful to a vast majority of people. There are lots of networks, lots of platforms for public access producers to distribute their programs. What we're trying to really preserve here is that keep it vital, keep it timely, keep it relevant to most of the people in Massachusetts, not just to those people who may have an interest in big-time wrestling or whatever it is your subject matter happens to be. Not that there's anything wrong with big-time wrestling, but what's that?
Who's the arbiter of that?
We're still feeling that out. I don't think there is really an arbiter. It's open. We're not really dissuading people. We're just trying to show that through feedback, using a feedback loop from the users who say, we want to be able to easily find relevant, timely content from state government, which we know is out there. And the reason now they know it's out there is the state, different agencies in the government and different officials in the government have gotten smart, and they'll say, hey, we just produced the latest episode of Senior Scene, and we're going to talk about senior scams, and they alert all the communities and say, this program is now available, and then we hear about it, and then all of those communities start downloading that program. So it actually works in concert, with some of these officials.
Relationships with all of the councils on aging, and so suddenly you say, your local council on aging person then connects to your act.
Small producer compete with that.
It's not
there's no competition.
intending to compete with a small producer at all.
No. The small producer can upload just like anybody else.
Somebody who has a mechanism to alert all the communities. He doesn't have the...
You can use the same mechanism.
Yeah.
The mechanism is available to everybody.
It's called a listserv.
Yeah, let me just, there is a network called Community Media Distribution Network, and also pegmedia.org, which also have been created to distribute and really serve the small producer, the public access producer who wants to get their show out across the country. MyMass TV is primarily statewide, so in some ways it's a limited audience, and some of the users by definition are not logging in to find a public access program about this subject or that subject. They're looking for programs that their residents are going to be interested in for a number of reasons. So
Well, having been encouraged to interrupt, let me just say one other thing, which is that, do you have, or would you be interested in looking at any statistics that tells you how well local access producers have been able to compete with the state in getting their content downloaded?
Well, I'd certainly be interested in that, but I think the point of it is that MyMass TV is that there is a demonstrated need by state officials and nonprofit agencies, okay, a lot of nonprofits, to distribute material that they can't afford to otherwise distribute. State doesn't have any money to distribute programming to residents who actually need to see this material or need to see the content. So that, and then there are a lot of stations out there saying we need to find a way to get this on in a timely manner, and so that's where that was born out of. The local producer in my town who produces a sports show, frankly, he's not interested. His audience is local. He doesn't need to compete with anybody. He wants to make sure his program is seen in his community and is available to the residents he's aiming for. For the vast majority of public access producers, that's what they're interested in. For those that have a program that may be of high production value and have a certain subject matter that might be of interest to a wider audience, they can use MyMass TV that way. There's no
Just
restrictions
keep
on
in
that.
mind that in most systems, there are at minimum 3 channels: public, educational, and government, 24/7, 365. So there's time on the channels. More and more, as part of the franchise renewals, we are trying to get the detailed programming schedules that all of our servers and the programming software that manages those servers downloaded so that the subscriber can go to the EPG, the electronic program guide, and find out what program is on what time. So it's not a matter of competition. Once again, scarcity is not an issue.
Can I ask who pays for the bandwidth for the video?
Well, the Mass Access, which collects membership fees and sponsorships, basically pays for that, bought the server, and pays for all of that. So if you're what we ask for is that if you're an access center, you just have to join Mass Access, pay the membership fee, and you get access to upload and download all the content you want. There's no limit, there's no charge for it once you're just a member. On the other side, we don't charge any government institutions anything to access it. And we found that to be really helpful because now they can say, oh, this does work. You know, we have 67 communities who downloaded that PSA. This works. You know what? Community media is serving a useful purpose not just in local towns, but across the state. And in what I've seen in terms of studying this is MyMass TV is the only kind of is a network that's unique in the country because it's not run by another bureaucracy. It's not run by the state. It's not run by the cable company. It's run partly using the technology and then using, you know, what I would say is the best tools of community organizing. It's people connecting to one another. And it's that real human connection. It's saying, hey, this is really important, you know. We've got to use this.
Jeff, let me
Yeah.
ask you to expand a little bit on one dimension of
Yeah.
programming with MyMass TV, and that is you've clearly emphasized the governmental use of this distribution network. And Archer's asked about local producers, but you did mention, and it seems to me worth expanding upon, that there's a whole nonprofit community,
Exactly.
that there are community organizations. Hundreds and there are thousands of them that do in fact have a statewide audience
Exactly.
for their message, and what you seem to be saying that is exciting, or even more so than the government information distribution, is the fact that now here's a network, here's a way to for nonprofits, for community organizations to distribute their message on a statewide basis. That's pretty radical.
Really the next
That's pretty
evolution.
new.
That's why we sort of came here today, is to say.
That's why I'm here
Right.
today.
Yeah.
My name is Peter Smith. I'm co-chair of the Coalition for a Strong UN, and what our entire mission is to make videos of speakers who come into the Boston area from Harvard, professors, heads of state, and have them talk about the United Nations and about international issues. So my question to you is, what format do we use? I know we need to probably get on a 28-minute, we
No,
need to edit them
no,
down to
you don't need
28
it.
minutes.
It can be of any length. And because MyMass TV is run by volunteers and we're still developing policy and procedures around it, there's 2 or 3 centers that are what we call upload sites. So all you have to do is mail me the DVDs and we upload them. We also provide a form that you fill out to give us what's called the metadata or the information about it. One of the things that we saw was a disadvantage in some of the other networks or bicycles is I'm a program director in Somerville. I have no time. I'm doing my job, but I'm being told to go download stuff off MyMass TV network. If I go to that program and I can't figure out what that show is about in about 10 seconds, I'm not going to download it. So we're trying to educate the producers and the providers of the program to say, fill out this form and think about the end user. If you really want people to watch it, give them a reason why they didn't want to download it in the first place. And we talk to public access producers, it's the same message. Like, you got a great program, sell it.
Where do we get the form?
You can just email me and I'll send it to you and show
Okay.
you how to log onto the website.
Is there any kind of
Okay.
gatekeeping on what gets uploaded and what doesn't?
I have your card, but you ought to give everybody on listening from the nonprofit world
Yeah.
what your email address is so they can do it.
Well, they can go to massaccess.org and find their way to MyMass TV and click on the email link and you'll get connected to it. As I say, the policies are a work in progress. You know, what we want to do is keep it open, but at the same time educate people as to its utility and its value to the 100 stations that have signed up for it. And so we hope by definition and by nature, some of the public access producers will say, well, this isn't really meeting my needs, but maybe I can, float out. What I've told some of the producers is I've said, put a couple episodes up there, send us the information so we can promote it, and let's see who downloads it. And if when they can log on and say, oh, you know what, nobody's downloading my show, they're going to self-select them. They're going to say, this isn't really meeting my needs. I want to get a wider audience. I want to get a wider reach.
Which is why Peg Media exists. It was created by folks in Maine. And it really is lots of public access producers use that as their main. Vermont has its own. New Jersey has its own. And then there's the Community Media Distribution Network, which is run by the NFLCP/ACM.
The last 2 things I want to say, then whatever we can switch to Peter or questions are that to anybody that's watching this who is in a nonprofit, definitely we want your content, we want your programming. If you're seeking to distribute programs, go to massaccess.org and or send an email to mymasstv@belmontmedia.org, and we'll find a way to talk to you to get your programming uploaded. What the innovations are going to be beyond this as of today, I don't really know, and I don't think I can predict it, except to say that what I think is successful about the Massachusetts model of community media isn't necessarily technology, and again, isn't necessarily use of the technology. It's the way that we communicate with one another, and it's the fact that we're always one step ahead of the policy and the public policy, and we keep connected to one another and try to keep ourselves vital and relevant. And we think that MyMass TV is a way for us to keep proving in real time what the value of community media is to the state, the federal government, and nonprofits, and then to regular ordinary taxpayers.
So there's no formatting guidelines? I mean, a DVD maybe is the simplest, but
DVD is the simplest way to get it uploaded.
anything.
And as we expand our upload sites, if you have somebody in Amherst, we'll try to tell them, go to the Amherst station and drop off your programming and get it uploaded. Because one of the things that's the main reason that we try to do that is you've got 5 or 6 different video server brands, and they all are slightly differently built technically. So in order for all of those communities to play back those programs, you've got to really tightly restrict the specifications on the content so that everybody can play it back on their server, if that makes any sense.
So you're the gatekeeper in that regard. So they come through in different formats on these disks, and you have to say, oh, this goes to that server, this goes to that server.
Well, we can straighten it all out. We can have, send all this sausage in and
Yep.
make it come out one way, and it's going to be acceptable to all community TV centers.
I'm guessing this is my turn. Don't want to take up too much time. I've been fortunate enough to help build 3 access centers from the ground up, Natick, Watertown, and here in Brookline. And I'm talking about history, and the youth being involved. I got involved in public access when I was in high school. That's how I got involved in television, and went to college for television, started working at public access, and I wanted to be in public access. I think I'm one of the very few that starts off with kind of that path. And I love what we ended up doing here.
The next generation.
Yeah. I love what we do in Brookline. We're a very outgoing, media facility. I don't consider us a public access center per se, even though we are Brookline Access Television. Access is just a small component of who we are as an organization. We're in a high school. We're used by the high school during the day. Our space is used to teach graphic design courses, animation, digital video, documentary filmmaking. So we have all that going on. In the evening, it's also used by adult ed to teach classes. We teach our own adult classes in standard, public access fare, your video editing, your studio production, your camera production. We have local colleges that teach classes here. We have 19 interns this semester. We are, a thriving multimedia facility, and what I hope is kind of the next generation or the next evolution of public access. Time? We're good?
Yeah, we got like 19 minutes left.
I'd just say that Peter is not the next generation. I hate to say this, I'm probably older than all of you, but because he's the current generation. The next generation is already working, but they're there. Now what Peter represents, and it's probably appropriate that he was the last to speak, is that he represents the access point to all the people out there who are not currently in this. All the people that you've encouraged to express themselves, to add to the content, to voice their concerns, to put their viewpoints out there and how to distribute them and how to get them put up. Your local cable, if you're fortunate to have a good contract in your community, which we do in Brookline, your local cable access is where you learn it, where you get access to the expensive equipment, where you get the training and the mentoring to do this. And if the rest of the panel has encouraged people out there listening that their nonprofit, their school group, their passion for American history, whatever it is, could be spread around, the first place they go, if they don't know it already, is they go to their local cable company and ask for some training and sign up and become a member.
Their local access organization.
Whatever.
Not necessarily the company. The company will then, of course, tell you, oh, you really want to go to the access entity. Just keep in mind, it's easy to find now because of communitymediadatabase.org is a website. It's all structured, this mapping is all structured by state. And not only does it list community media centers, it also lists radio, community, all radio stations, as well as now TV stations. Is one of the things, projects that Rob and the folks at New America Foundation are doing is seeing if we can track which TV stations are in fact putting all of the advertising buys for the elections into an electronic accessible format rather than just public files at the station. So there's lots of stuff. Yeah, Wendy, you should be up here too.
Oh, well, thank you
So
very much.
can I drop in one thing before you? So we have about 16 minutes more. We usually run until about 6 o'clock. So now's your chance. So let Wendy go, but yeah.
Well, I think that we've heard today that we have such a vibrant, exciting access community here in Massachusetts, and I have to agree with you that it's not just programming, it's the space, it's the activities, it's the community involvement that's really important. However, not to throw a damp cloth on all of this, the new generation is cutting the cord, and I wondered if anybody would like to speak to what's going to happen to all our vibrant community access centers when people get all of their television over their computers.
Well, just keep in mind, and Peter, you can
Yep.
obviously respond to this, and what access centers have been doing for the last 10 years is going ahead and having their websites as a way for people to either view a stream of the channel as its cablecast, or to download programming, or to, well, I know where your concern, of course, Wendy, is funding.
Yes.
Because as people cut the cord, that means that the franchise fees or access fees that the local municipality charges to the cable operator, which is what funds the operations and the equipment purchases for access centers. And keep in mind that Massachusetts is not only the second largest, has the second largest number of PEG access center, community media centers in the country, only after California, but we have been able to fend off telcos, particularly Verizon, that has been trying to take franchising authority away from municipalities by imposing state franchising. But then there's also the other ideal in Massachusetts, and that is the municipalities can only get 50 cents a subscriber a year as a franchise fee. The state of Massachusetts in the early 80s was wise enough to say, based upon the old version of the FCC cable regulations, is that those franchise fees need to be spent on cable-related matters, which in Massachusetts, that in essence means the operations and capital for PEG access operations. And so there is this whole issue of diversification of revenue, which everybody that's part of the ACM group here knows that I have ranted and raved for 10 years about how important it is, because we cannot rely forever and ever on franchise fees, access fees as our revenue stream, as it has for the last 35 years. So diversification of revenue is very important. That's your issue?
Well, that's easy to say. However, you know, to make up however many $100,000 a year that
Exactly.
you get from franchise fees would be very difficult. And yes, production is getting cheaper and distribution is getting cheaper, so that's good, but still, buildings are expensive. So, I don't know, what are your thoughts?
And people are expensive.
Yeah.
You know, because you gotta have the people. This is, you know, just because somebody can sit down in front of a webcam and, you know, make a video doesn't mean that anybody in their right mind will watch it.
Well, that's the case you have to think about making more aggressively, because in fact, the next generation, in fact, thinks that they can use their iPad and make everything that you make. And well, just let me finish the thought. The thing is, we started out on the premise that we were all working hard to let people get their ideas and thoughts and productions into the market. The question is, can we beat Yahoo? And of course, one part of it is, if we can't beat Yahoo, if so many people cut the cable, then we don't want our messages on the cable anymore. Maybe we don't beat Yahoo.
Could be.
I mean, one of the things, I mean, you're talking about, you know, kids are using iPads and iPhones for distribution and they could care less about public access. One of the things, and I have, you know, Peter's on my board, I have Andy and my board president here. One of the things I mention at every single board meeting is, you know, I'm not really looking at the numbers of how many hours of programming we're producing every single month or every single week. I'm counting the number of people that walk through our door. I'm all about foot traffic. The more foot traffic I can encourage, the more viable we are as an access center, not only for the public access portion, but also for community training, you know, an art center, a place for people to go and learn and express. And getting back to the iPad thing, I mean, yeah, it's great. You can buy it. You can do a lot of things with it. Everybody uses one. And one of the things that we're exploring now is how can a simple iPad work for us? They have a video camera. You can buy Avid on them now. One of the things that I've been looking to launch, and if anybody has a checkbook, you're more than welcome to sign over a couple dollars, is a Camera for Kids campaign. You know, creating iPads as a kit that we can give to middle school kids, you know, to grade schoolers, that they can learn and how to use it properly, how to shoot good video, and not just, you know, go out and shoot whatever and upload it onto YouTube. One of the new things we're doing, and hopefully our technical director here will get this on air. I believe he will. He's a good technical director. Until now, is I have faith in you, Ben, don't worry. Is we are starting to put all of our training material into iBooks. This is just one that we've started working on. This is for Final Cut Pro, which is nice because the biggest disconnect that we found out that we had was that people were coming in, they were becoming members, and they wanted to get trained on something. And the lag between when classes were available, when they could sit down and do something, you know, they were starting to, you know, separate themselves from us as an organization. So what we've started doing is creating training on cameras, creating training on video editing, on the studio, and everything's available right here. So somebody comes in, they can take an iPad, take a camera, they can get certified. So if somebody comes in at noon, by that 8 o'clock production that night, they are certified, they can go take out a camera and they can produce. And it's just a way to get people involved, get them involved quickly. And we want to start doing that with kids as young as, you know, the 4th and 5th grade, where teachers would be able to come in, take out an entire kit of 5 or 6 iPads that has all the training on it, has everything, and they can start teaching the kids, and then the kids can come here afterwards. We already do camps over the summer. We do music video camps. We've actually hired bands to come in to teach kids how to mix music and shoot music videos. So just I think offering a lot of different programs, you know, diversifying what we are as an organization is key to long-term survival.
Absolutely, and keep in mind that I think if you haven't had a chance, the announcement of all of this that Deborah and Peter put together, there's all kinds of links in there, and one of them is to the issue of community media review, which used to be called Community Television Review, if you remember back in the NFLCP days. The issue that I guest edited on community media centers connecting with the new broadband networks. We've gone from PEG access to community media centers. The next step is really broadband media centers. As more and more fiber networks are built out thanks to the federal government's BTOP program. Western and central Massachusetts is getting its network called Mass Broadband 123 because it serves 123 municipalities, which is a big chunk of the state with 351 towns and cities. All the South Coast, Cape and Islands are going to be served by Open Cape, which is a different fiber network managed by the nonprofit rather than the Mass Broadband Institute, which is managing or running Mass Broadband 123. The next iteration of all of this is broadband access centers, meaning we are no longer strangled by asymmetrical bandwidth that doesn't really serve our needs. We are going to have gigabit symmetrical service to access centers all over the country. This is happening all over the country. There's gazillions of articles in this issue of, it was one of the largest, lengthiest issues of CMR that the ACM ever produced. At last year's conference in Tucson, one of the presenters I had in my pre-conference workshop, Jay April, who was one of the original NFLCP alternate media center interns, who is now running the Access Center in Maui. He came in with, and I'm trying to remember the name of it, but there's this brand new little handheld device that you plug your smartphone into it, and you then have a camera and microphone. And you can go to the Maui Access Center's website, and you can see they became part of a Zero Divide, which is a California nonprofit, got a very large grant from BTOP for sustainable broadband adoption. And Maui is one of those partners with Zero Divide. And so they're doing, with kids, they're teaching them Mojo, mobile journalism. And so there is I'm pretty sure it's mojo.org, and you can see the citizens journalism that these middle school and high school kids are putting together using their smartphones and this little, it has a name like the frog or it was something. It was just, he blew everybody away. The technology just keeps getting cheaper, better, and better. And these kids are loving to use it.
So do the old folks.
Absolutely.
So do the old folks who are in local access centers and local access programming and things like that. If we survive Yahoo and YouTube, how do we do it? And if we don't, who suffers?
Well, just keep in mind, I don't know whether you realize this, but a lot of access centers have their own YouTube channel.
Well, you know,
Depending
on whether you care about their continued existence, which is not a given.
But
Doing that and also training people to make programming on iPads can be perceived as slashing your own throat.
No, because all it is a tool, and it's transmission. Once again, you still have to have the training. You know?
They don't believe it.
Oh, well then they're idiots. Because one of the things that I lecture...
How often have idiots won?
We don't need to go there right now.
But Chuck, I'm just not, to answer this question, I'm not sure in 10 years you're going to have anything but, if community media survives, it's because the local governments say we need to be able to host these meetings and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The kids they're gone. I mean, and they're not, where access has been lost, that's not coming back, I don't think. And
Yeah.
I think the only way that it's going
We've
to
lost
survive
over 100
is...
access centers because of state franchising around the country.
So I'm asking you whether we
Yeah.
care.
A lot of people are still fighting.
I'm not
I
saying
care.
I don't. I'm asking you as the panel whether we care.
Absolutely, of course. I mean, and the interesting thing is that because of the listservs that are out there, where we're, 24/7 people are posting stuff, where access has been lost, oftentimes people finally get it once they lose it and reinstate it.
But I think the only way it survives...
Because keep in mind,
Chuck, you got to take a breath. I think the only way it survives is you've got to have, I think, some kind of legislative approach where you're going to have to find a way to strengthen a legislative framework that provides a funding source. Without the funding source, it's easy to talk about fund diversification, and if you're in Grand Rapids or you're in Sacramento or someplace, or Somerville or wherever it happens to be, they're not going to survive. There's no way to do it. So.
Well, I really feel that if we started streaming, we're sort of cutting our own throats, because I think a lot of people do watch Access. And my producers are coming to me and saying, why can't we stream? Why don't we should be streaming the channel? And I'm saying, well, we could, but that takes incentive away from you to buy cable. And so I'm not sure that's really to our benefit. And people really should think about it, but I'm not sure that public access will survive. I think government access probably will.
Well, that was exactly the point I was going to be heading for, is keep in mind, school districts understand the importance of these channels. Local government understands. It's public access that is in danger, because keep in mind that even with all of this state franchising that has occurred, the franchise fees that go to the municipality as rents for the use of public right-of-way didn't evaporate. What evaporated was the funding for PEG access, operations, and capital. Government doesn't like to give up those dollars, and we're just about out of time, but just keep in mind that what's threatened is public access, much more so than educational or government access. And I think that's also Wendy's point. The elected officials, they get it. School committees and superintendents and teachers get it. And keep in mind that one of the important things, and Peter is really right on, when I meet with superintendents and school committees, what I talk about is the value of what they're doing as pathways to learning for content creation. The second largest export of the United States is content. The first is military equipment. We have to have people learning how to make content, whatever that content may be. Are you the director?
This is good. So yeah, I'm feeling like we're put a little bow on it. So let's put a little snazzy bow up. So yeah, any finishing remarks?
I'm just going to say, in Belmont, we're looking at programming in a different way, rather than just fill up the hours of programming, trying to find programs, and being more curators of programs to say, how can we get people to tune in the first place? And so that's one approach, but I also think you just have to be nimble. You have to be able to be where my 9-year-old boys are, and be able to be so adept at using the platforms and the media to connect your audience to the producers. That's and whether it's streaming or something else, I don't think streaming is a problem. It's a legislation that has to support all that activity somehow, and it's a tough thing.
I think just, I made a little comment earlier, but us building in a high school is, there was a reason for that, and that is looking long term at our viability as an organization, where we're already providing that community benefit of being a training institution, and we've teamed up with the Adult Ed, we've teamed up with the New England Institute of Art, we teach classes from Newberry College over here, so we're looking at those items as our long-term viability.
Yep.
And the book.
And the book. It's all here. The thing that was so amazing when I got around to reading this book is that none of this is new. From the late 60s to now, it's just been implementing the ideas and the vision that was outlined by Ralph Lee Smith, who, by the way, I did connect with, did get him to write a quick one-page article for the issue of CMR, and tried to get him re-engaged because Ralph decided that this was it. He was so fed up after the industry just kind of cleaned his clock and everybody else's clock in Congress way back when, that he has now become a master dulcimer player. So he's still making sweet music. Thanks, Josh.
So this is great, yeah. Chuck and Peter and Jeff, thank you very much. And thank you for all the great audience feedback. Very good.